who works for me at Facebook, and he started this conversation not joking by saying, I didn't read your book. If you were one of the 5 people who work directly for me at Facebook, you would either read my book or pretend to, right? I mean, read an article or 2 and pretend. But he said, no, I didn't read your book. But I did listen to all the things you've been saying all these years, and I got feedback that a woman who works for me is too aggressive. By men and women. So rather than write too aggressive in her performance review, I went back to those people who said it, and I said, can I ask you a question? What did she do that was too aggressive in the specific? And they answered the question, and then he said, if a man had done those exact same things, would you have thought he was too aggressive? And to a person, they said no. Our biases against female leadership run deep, and they start early. Men only, please, men only. Raise your hand if anyone's ever called you when you were a child bossy. Men only. There's always a few. Women, raise your hand if you were called bossy as a little girl. Bossy is a super interesting word. We don't use it for little boys because when a little boy leads, it's expected, but when a little girl leads, it's not. So what can you do? What's the bias interrupter? This one you can fix. The next time you hear a woman is too aggressive, too ambitious, political, not as well liked by her peers, you understand it, you diagnose it, get it down to the specifics. And this weekend, go to a playground. Someone will call a little girl bossy, probably her parents. You walk up with a big smile, you say, that little girl's not bossy. That little girl has executive leadership skills. I'm going to pause for one moment on that, just one moment. I'm going to say it the other way. That little boy has executive leadership skills. No humor. That's because humor is about going about our expectations. It's funny because you're surprised. If you want to understand why there are no 4-star female generals in the Army right now, and why Silicon Valley has 2 female CEOs, you just understood it. We do not like leadership in girls and women. But we can and we should, because it might do the world a whole lot of good to have more women with executive leadership skills. Number 3, the responsibility bias. A friend of mine had a daughter. She was 5 years old. She said to her mother, I have a problem. And she said, well, what's the problem? I want to be an astronaut. This is before NASA kind of backed away from that whole thing. So that wasn't the problem. She said, well, why is that a problem? He said, well, the boy I like wants to be an astronaut too. But we can't both go into space. Someone has to watch our kids. I think it will have to be me. That little girl's right. 70% of mothers work. Most work full time. Even for 2 working parents, the women bear the great majority of the responsibility in the home for housework and childcare. That changes how women approach careers from the very beginning. Think of a career like a marathon. You get to the front, the start line, equally fit and trained, men and women. You could argue that with women getting 57% of the college degrees in this country, women are better fit and trained, but we're generous, so we're going to give you half. Equally fit and trained, the gun goes off. What happens? What are the voices the men hear as they start running? You've got this, good job, keep going. What are the voices the women hear? Are you sure you want to start running? Why start a race you're probably not going to finish? Careers continue, race goes on. What are the voices the men hear? You've got this, keep going. What are the voices the women hear? Should you be at work when your child needs you at home? Men only. Raise your hand if anyone's ever said to you, should you be working? Raise your hand. Men only men. Never gotten a hand. Women, raise your hand if anyone's ever said to you, should you be working? We constantly tell women they can't have it all, language I truly hate, which means you can't be a mother and have a career. But guess what? Most women have to work. They have to do both. So our constant messages that tell them they can't are really detrimental. Now, there's a really good reason for men to do more at home. In families where chores are split more evenly, those marriages are happier. Gay couples actually split chores fairly evenly. Heterosexual couples don't. But when they do, those couples are happier. Lower divorce rates, more happiness, more sex. Probably inappropriate to joke about that at the Pentagon, but there's data behind this. There's data behind this. I tell men all over the world, you want to do something nice for your wife? Don't buy flowers, do laundry. The CEO of FTD heard me say that on a late night TV show. He sent me the largest bouquet you've ever seen with a note. Can't you tell men to do laundry and buy flowers? So on his behalf, buy the flowers too. But if you're only going to do one, definitely do the laundry. For your children, and this is really important, at any income level, regardless of how active a mother is, children with more engaged fathers do better. They do better in school, they do better professionally, they are stronger emotionally, they are happier. This is good stuff. Equality will help, even with the demanding careers we have. That equality is especially important in the military. In all branches, 46% of married women are married to other men in the military. 5% of married men are married to women in the military, which means that making couples available to do both is going to be critical to getting more women to stay in the military, stay in the civilian force that's supporting the military, and move up the ranks in places like the Pentagon. Women don't just have the responsibility bias at work, they have it at home, they have it at work. Women do more office housework, communal tasks, serving on the committees, mentoring, taking the notes. I just spoke at West Point. They have something they call take boards, where they break people into groups. Y'all probably know much more about this than I do. And they do assignments where they're looking for leadership skills. Guess who's taking the notes? The women. Why? Because they think they have better handwriting. If you're observing, no, this is true. I was at West Point 3 weeks ago. If you're looking at a group and you're observing, you're the commanding officer observing, and you're looking for leadership, who's going to be the natural leader? The person taking the notes or the person speaking? I watch this all day in corporate America. Women taking the notes. The woman taking the notes almost never makes the killer point that gets her the promoted and gets her noticed. And so sharing those communal tasks in the office housework, that will matter a great deal to leadership too. I believe that the United States military has an incredibly important role to play here. Incredibly important role. If you look at the history of desegregation, the military led. A lot of the good things that happen in our society happened here first. That means if we want to increase our progress along racial discrimination, if we want to increase our progress along the leadership gap for women and people of color, the military has to lead. And the military can lead. I'm here because I was invited by your senior leaders and some great women who followed up and made it happen. I spent the morning speaking to the flag officers of the Navy. I've been to Quantico and the Naval Academy in West Point. These are your leaders inviting me because I think the people in this audience, the leaders, really care. Doing this explicitly will make a big difference. At any level, if you are a man or you're a woman and you are willing to talk openly about the biases, we have a handout we're giving out somewhere here. Hopefully you'll get it. If not, all the information is available for free on leanin.org. Talk about this. Do it openly. And explicitly support women. Along with my book a couple years ago, started a foundation, leanin.org. We help women and men form lean-in circles. 10 people who meet once a month with an agenda that we provide for free, educational materials we provide. You can register for free on our site. We were hoping for 1,000 circles. There are now 22,500 in over 105 countries in all 5 military branches, at West Point, at the Naval Academy, and increasing across all the service academies too. Explicit support for women, by women and men will make a big difference. When we started the circles at the Naval Academy, then Admiral Miller asked senior officers at the Naval Academy to mentor each circle, men as well as women, to show the deep support that was there. Lieutenant Commander Emily Bassett runs a group of lean-in circles in Norfolk, Virginia. All of her circle members are women who are commanding warships or are in line to command warships. And she's talked to us about how those circles have empowered her and her fellow members to believe they could take the next step. Rachel Grimsey, is Rachel here? Right down there. Rachel's talked to us, a young woman working at the Pentagon, about how her circle is helping encourage female leadership at the Pentagon, and we're grateful for your leadership. Do it explicitly by joining circles. Do it out loud by talking about biases. But let your voice be heard on why diversity in leadership is mission critical, why you think it will make you a better leader, why it will be good for your career, and why you think it is so important. Meritocratic organizations and people, as I said before, often have the worst outcomes. They did an experiment, a computer simulation of looking at bias in performance. And they gave the women ratings 1 to 100, and they gave the men ratings 1 to 101. 1% bias, not much. All the studies say we have biases in real life that are much bigger than that. They then modeled 15% attrition, and every time we had attrition, you promoted the people below with the highest ratings. In 20 cycles of this, which isn't so many performance cycles, with just a 1% performance bias, the organization at the top went from being 50-50 at the bottom to 35% women. Tiny biases will make a big difference. That means that your voice on the small bias interrupters, starting to mentor circles, start circles, that will make a huge, huge difference. I believe the results of equality will be profound. Faster economic growth. If women were in the workforce in the United States at the same rate as men, economists predict 5% greater GDP growth. Anyone who's looking at the GDP projections says that it's 2.5% to 3% as far as the eye can see. Can you imagine what an additional 5% growth would do for this country? Anyone who looks at the performance of teams know that diverse teams make better decisions. I think Facebook has an important mission. I'm proud to work on it. I don't think anything is as important as the mission you all have. You keep us safe. You keep the world open to democracy. And boy, is it a complicated, scary world out there. What you do has never been more important. Using the full talents of the population, using the very best of everyone, can only make us stronger. Both at the Pentagon, in all of the services, but also across everything we do. I want to thank you again for your service, for my freedom. I want to thank you again for caring enough to be here. And I want to encourage and applaud you to do just a little bit more to get us to equality, because if you do this, the rest of the country will follow. Thank you. Questions? Yeah. Questions, comments, stand up, tell me I'm wrong. Seriously, the more direct, the better. Yeah.
Hi, Kathleen Agee Walker, U.S. Navy. Could you share with the audience here any interesting comment or question that was asked in this morning's class?
It was really interesting. I had a chance to meet with some of the leaders, some of the female admirals in a smaller group, and then I spoke to the flag officers. There's a conference I think they do it once a year here. And what was really interesting was talking about some of the issues they face. So one of the really important issues that's happening in the military is, because of the things I talked about, it's really hard to be a woman and actually identify as a woman. So I was invited by then General Amos, the commandant, to go to Quantico about a year ago, not even a year ago. And he had a meeting of a lot of the female senior Marines, including the one General Reynolds, who was there. And a whole bunch of them told me that they've never been to a meeting of all women, and had the commandant not invited them themselves, they would not have come. I heard this morning at the Navy, and I heard in earlier meetings today at the Pentagon from the Army, that it's really hard for women to even show up to something that's for women, because it feels like we're asking for special treatment. It feels like we're not tough enough. It feels like we think the standards should be lowered for us. I understand that, because I went through most of my career that way. But that shows us how far we have to come, how we have to make this safe, how we have to say, not only can you come to a meeting of